You are, here we go. You are being recorded. Um, Welcome to today's webinar, introducing California's Beaver Coexistence program. We are going to be going until 12:30 today, and we're going to take a break because that's far too long to be sitting in one place and paying attention. We will take a break at 11:30, a 10-minute break, 11:30 to 11:40. So stick with us, get up and stretch and listen and whatnot. In the meantime, the chat is disabled. If you have questions, and I'm sure people will have questions, I hope people have questions, please use the Q&A box. That is a feature of Zoom. There's a place to enter your questions. Our panelists may, in real time, type an answer for you, or hopefully we'll have time somewhere during the webinar to do answering questions live. Please do not raise your hand. We're going to have an impossibility of dealing with that unless you have technological issues. If you have technological issues, please raise your hand so Andros will chat with you. If like sound or something isn't working, Andros, thank you for being here today, a member of Occidental Arts and Ecology Center's team, supporting us in all things technological and having worked hard already in the moments leading up to this. I really want to thank the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Nature-Based Solutions, Wetlands and Mountain Meadows Grant Program for making today's webinar possible, and indeed the Beaver Coexistence Program possible in general at Occidental Arts and Ecology Center's Water Institute. We're really pleased to be working on this and sharing the nature of that program with you today. Let's see, with I think no further ado, we dive straight into today's program, hearing from Brock Dolman and Kate Lundquist, the co-directors of the water program, letting you know a little bit about beavers and the Beaver Coexistence program. It's over to you, Brock.
Well, thank you, Gray, and good morning, everyone. And I'm happy to be here with y'all. And yeah, Kate and I are going to split this introduction to the Beaver basics and a little bit about this coexistence program to kind of start us off. And so, yeah, my name is Brock Dahlman, and I co-direct our Water Institute with Kate Lundquist and our Bring Back the Beaver campaign, of which the Beaver Coexistence program is a component of. So we have been doing this work for over 20 years, but really officially, in a big way in the last 15 years or so. And the Bring Back the Beaver campaign is a holistic strategy for a statewide effort to create a culture of stewardship with beaver in California. And we're happy to be here today talking about the coexistence part of that. So the basics of our California Beaver Coexistence Program, which again was funded by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, their Nature-Based Solutions Program for their Wetlands and Mountain Meadows Grant Program. We're going to hear more from folks from California Department of Fish and Wildlife later. But it's really the components of the program are that we're working on a statewide beaver conflict assessment report. Then there's Beaver Coexistence contractor training, which we're going to hear more about. There's going to be technical support in the form of a Beaver help desk, where folks can go online and get information about Beaver Coexistence, and also that will link them to the trained contractors and other information. Then there's a financial support component to this, where there will be cost share programs to support the technical outreach or the implementation, offsetting some of the costs of the implementation of different non-lethal coexistence strategies. There's associated education outreach, and also ultimately we're working on a beaver conflict response plan. Real quick, for folks who don't know, beaver were nearly trapped out to extinction in California and nationally, if you will, continentally, at least Castor canadensis, the North American beaver we're talking about. And in California, by the early 1900s, the estimate was only about 1,000 beaver were left. And then California stepped it up and actually did a lot of their own translocations from, they say, late 1930 to 1950. And yes, in fact, we did also, like Idaho, parachute beavers as well. And there are several papers that a number of us co-authored on looking at the historic range of beaver, both in Sierra Nevada and the coastal area. If people would like to um, better understand that information, because I think it's really important about trying to better understand where were beaver within the state at, say, time of trapping contact, and what happened on the coast with the maritime fur trappers who really got after it pretty early in the late 1700s, and then the mountain men type trappers that show up in the 1820s and 30s. And by 1850, 70, we had been pretty well decimated of beavers. So it's an interesting piece of the puzzle, and yet the conflated part of the translocation efforts of what was called the Division of Wildlife at the time is an interesting, it's a super fascinating history in California. One of the cool things about beaver is, right, they're an aquatic mammal, semi-aquatic mammal, and they're really tasty. So predators like to eat them a lot, mountain lions especially in California. And so beavers need deep water for doing what beavers do. But one of those things is for predator avoidance, but it also helps inundate areas. They're basically forest farmers. They irrigate vegetation. They're all vegetarian. They don't eat fish. They make lodges that are either in lakes, like the classic lodge people know about, you've seen on movies where they've got an underwater entrance, or many of our riverine beavers make dams, and then they'll have a lodge in the bank somewhere in the deep pool associated with the dam, then the pond behind that. So they're very interesting. Beavers don't make their lodge in the dam, though. And one thing that we really like about beavers is the beaver benefit package, if you will. And one of the critical things that beavers offer us in the society is the hydrologic benefits, both to water quantity and water quality. Their beaver wetlands act as filters, and they can trap nutrients, they can sequester carbon. And there's some interesting studies early on in Lake Tahoe about the benefits of beaver wetlands and helping to keep Tahoe blue, but this is widely known nationally. And then there's some other really interesting science around beaver wetlands and climate buffering, whether the beaver dams can act like speed bumps to mitigate flood and attenuate peak flooding and slow and spread and sink water, and also the work of a number of folks, Dr. Emily Fairfax et al., of what they call Smokey the Beaver, and how these wetted beaver areas can function to provide these linear green fire breaks that become refugia for other wildlife, and in the midst of some of our large mega fires that we've been experiencing. And then ultimately, the thing is this idea of beavers as a keystone species, right? An organism whose presence in the environment and what it does disproportionately increases the fecundity, the carrying capacity for other forms of life, and the flows, the fire, water, carbon, nutrient flows for greater resiliency. And beaver, I think, are well documented in their behavior of the work they do in the dams they create, the impoundments they create, the canals they create, the successional dynamics with vegetation that they create habitat for so many other species, a number of which in California are listed species, threatened and endangered species. Our salmonids, for instance, are really benefit, our willow flycatchers, a number of our amphibians, cascades frogs, and for instance, things of that nature, sage grouse. And so the beauty of the beaver ultimately in wanting to coexist with the beaver is that there are so many things that we in society are desiring: more water, cleaner water, groundwater recharge, fire mitigation, endangered species recovery, that beavers can help us and benefit from. And so I'm going to pass it to Kate.
Thanks so much, Brock. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So we really want to focus on a holistic approach to restoring beaver, and there are a variety of actions that we can do to make that happen. And while a bunch of us may have heard about how exciting the relocation is that's happening and a lot of beaver mimicry, we really today and always want to focus on coexistence first. So we're going to, next slide, do that. And that's what we're going to talk about, some techniques that we all can be implementing to make sure that we can coexist with our beaver friends and still receive all the benefits. Next slide. So beavers love, for example, to block culverts and drains. For them, it's just an easy way to inundate the area behind that culvert. And so we have figured out really inexpensive and easy to install ways to prevent them from doing that. And so you'll see on the right here what's called a keystone fence or trapezoidal fence. It basically prevents the beaver from accessing that culvert, allows the flow to pass at base flow and during high flows as well. It goes over the fence and it just outsmarts the beaver. They give up, it's not useful, or they can't succeed in getting that water to stop flowing through the culvert with that fencing. And in places where you also want to lower the pond a little bit so that you have some say in that matter, you can attach a pipe with a cage inlet, as you'll see shown on the right there, and that can be really helpful as well. Next slide. Speaking of pipes with caged inlets, this is what we call a flexible pond leveler. And this is a device that we can use when beavers are building dams that are causing inundation to the degree that we aren't happy with. And so there are ways that we can reduce that flooding at base flow and bring that water down so it stays deep enough to keep the beaver. Again, we want to keep them around for their benefits, but we also want to try to mitigate the flooding and the damage that can come with that. So this is a great technique for basically putting in a spillway that is in the form of this pipe with this cage, and it works really well. And I'm excited Dave Cook is here. He'll be able to talk more about a collaboration that we did in Sonoma. Next slide. Another thing beavers love to do are clog our water conveyance structures. We see here a twin track weir that is a favorite of beaver. They gum them up all up and down the state and across North America. And thankfully, our friends at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Sutter National Wildlife Refuge created this inventive device that is highly effective in preventing beaver from blocking it. So basically, it's a steel shroud with a perforated pipe and a caged inlet that prevents the beaver from getting access to the weir. They can no longer gum it up with mud and sticks, and the water still flows through. And the water managers can still put those flashboards in the inner track to control the water level that they want at the degree they want. So great technique. Super recommend this for folks that haven't heard about this or tried it themselves yet. Next slide. And also, beavers, being herbivores, they need to chew vegetation for food resources, also for building, and also for their teeth, which grow 4 feet a year. So imagine they've got to do a lot of chewing to keep those teeth sharp. We can protect our vegetation really well, and it's not that expensive. We can get really sturdy fencing, welded wire fencing, T-post, and wrap our vegetation. You can also get electric fencing to prevent beaver from getting access to the vegetation that you want to protect. There's also a way that you can take exterior latex paint and add some masonry sand to that and paint it on to the bark if you're in an area where you need to maintain aesthetics. And this just needs to be reapplied annually, and it works really well as well. Beaver don't like to chew on sand, so it can help prevent them from getting, access and successfully taking down those trees and other precious vegetation that you want to protect. And so we have all of these suite of strategies that are simple and effective. And these are the kind of techniques that this new program is going to help people think about what's the best design for their site specifically, and where are the resources that they can get, whether it's technical assistance or financial assistance. And so we have plenty of information on our website. Beaver Institute also has an amazing amount of information, as does CDFW. And so if you are interested, definitely check out our new Beaver web portal, QR code on the left there. And then if you have specific requests about the program itself, or you want help with beaver issues that you have, please fill out our Beaver Help request form that's listed there on the right. And with that, I say thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And we'll pass it back to Gray.
Thank you. Hey, and as you saw, we've got QR codes today, right? And so you may have your phone handy. We'll show those QR codes again at the end. But if your phone's handy, you can start clicking on those links and launch them in your browser and get back to those sites later on. Thanks very much, Kate and Brock, for showing, all that we're doing with this coexistence program and a little bit about beavers too. Next up, Valerie and Molly.
Thanks, Gray. Happy to be with you all this morning. I'm going to go ahead and give everybody a heads up that we are experiencing some technical issues over in CDFW this morning. So Molly and I are in the same room together trying to make sure that you can uh, hear both of us and we can both hear you. So you might have to bear with us a little bit this morning.
Things are coming
Um,
through well. Your slide looks beautiful. Yeah.
Testing, testing.
Yep. There's a little echo there. One
Oh,
of you has a mic on that shouldn't.
yeah. Okay, I think we're both fully functional. We might be on it, guys.
Yep.
Okay, well, Molly's popping over back into her office, but I will just say that I'm Valerie Cook. I'm the program manager for CDFW's relatively new beaver restoration program. Hopefully, you've all heard of us. We've been trying to make an awful lot of noise over here, but we're really excited to be a part of this morning, and really looking forward to collaborating with the new Beaver Coexistence program and being a resource to help connect with the department's regional staff that are really on the ground responding to human-beaver conflicts where they pop up and interfacing with stakeholders that can potentially really benefit from the existence of this program. So with that, I'm going to attempt to turn this over to Molly to kick off our brief talk this morning.
All right. Hello, everyone. You can hear me?
Yes.
Very
Well,
exciting. Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Valerie, for the introduction. I want to start off by just giving a brief introduction about our program. Our program was initiated in 2023 under a funding directive from the governor. And there are four main facets of that funding directive that we are meant to carry out as part of the beaver restoration program. And one of the top directives is to promote human-beaver coexistence strategies. So that is something that our program is extremely focused on. And we'll talk to you a little bit today about how we are involved in coexistence in the state. So the Beaver Restoration Program under CDFW, our role in coexistence is to provide non-lethal recommendations. We cannot provide technical assistance to landowners, but we can provide funding resources. And we are based in our West Sacramento headquarters office, but the conflict responders for when beaver conflict comes up is really up to our regions. And so we are in coordination with our regions from the headquarters office to help them understand and implement coexistence when beaver conflict arises. And so we have a funded or sorry, Fish and Game Code in the state that CDFW shall issue permits for beaver depredation when conflict occurs. However, for landowners, it is voluntary for them to implement non-lethal deterrence. But as we all probably know already, this creates a financial burden to the landowner, as well as there's been a gap until now in the technical assistance available to landowners who want to implement coexistence. But fortunately, with this new program under OAEC, they can be a resource for these landowners that submit wildlife incident reports to the department for a depredation permit. And under our depredation policy, it was recently revamped. Now our conflict responders have the ability to assess the benefits and impacts of beavers in these conflict situations to listed species. They can also verify beaver damage and ensure that it's actually beavers that are causing the conflict issue. And they can identify and recommend feasible non-lethal deterrence coexistence strategies to landowners in lieu of issuing a depredation permit. But it is all voluntary from the landowner to implement those resources. So we have been in the process of developing a coexistence toolkit at the department, and this is in its final stages of review. It will be available on our website pretty soon, but this is intended to be a resource not only for landowners, but for our internal responders to help them understand better the specific cases in which each of these devices is appropriate to address conflict. And so this provides guidance for coexistence device builds. It tells you each of the coexistence devices that we know of are being installed across the country. It talks about average cost of installs, the build and install instructions for each of these devices, as well as size requirements, particularly for fencing, where fish passage may be a concern. And I'm going to kick it back to Valerie to cover the laws and permitting, as well as our self-certification process.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. So I suspect this is probably a pretty hot topic for an awful lot of people on this call today. I think it's worth us just talking about right up front Fish and Game Code Section 1602. That basically is the law that says an entity shall not substantially divert or obstruct the natural flow of, or substantially change or use any material from the bed, bank, or channel of any river, stream, or lake, or deposit or dispose of debris, waste, or other material containing crumbled, flaked, or ground pavement, where it may pass into any river, stream, or lake. So, long story short, effectively, that code section requires LSA agreements for where particular types of activities can result in those actions that are outlined in 1602. So effectively, the process that is in place is where work is occurring in the bed, bank, or channel. Entities are required to notify CDFW prior to commencing those activities that may substantially alter a river, lake, or stream. That notification process is how the department and our LSA staff evaluate whether or not that activity requires an LSA agreement. So what's noteworthy here is that this also requires payment of notification fees. So several $100s in notification fees for the department to evaluate whether or not the proposed activity requires an LSA agreement. That is then another cost to get that agreement in place. What's worth talking about here is that the deterrent installations that are so commonly implemented to alleviate human-beaver conflicts, when those are installed consistent with CDFW's coexistence toolkit and the build sheets that Molly mentioned, we do not expect those to require a lake and stream bed alteration agreement. So we are keenly interested in figuring out how to sort of streamline the process and alleviate this process of notification and payments of fees and the department's determination that notification isn't required and refund of the fees. So essentially, we're trying to cut out a process that we expect in the majority of cases will not be required. Next slide, Molly. So to do that, the Beaver Restoration Program is coordinating with the department's lake and stream bed alteration folks, the permitting folks, to develop a self-certification process that landowners or installers working on their behalf can submit a self-certification form to self-certify that that activity, the proposed activity for installation of beaver conflict deterrence, will not substantially alter flows, won't be placing heavy equipment in the bed or channel, won't be depositing or removing substrates, and will not substantially adversely impact our fish and wildlife resources. So the self-certification form that's under development right now it's pretty straightforward, will require submission of site-specific information, so location-specific lat-long details, information about the type of conflicts occurring, the proposed deterrents that will be installed, when those will be installed, and what methods will be followed. So, for example, are you following CDFW's build sheet or guidance that's been put out by the Beaver Institute or Backsaver? You know, we know that we're not the only resource out there for this information. And then really ensuring that the installations are also consistent with any minimum size requirements that we have put in place for ensuring fish passage. So that process will culminate in submission of self-certification forms that the Beaver Restoration Program can review, and ultimately that approval equates to us turning around and giving a letter back that says no notification is required, meaning you don't have to pay that, I think, ballpark of $700 fee for the department to then, take on the time and the workload to turn around and tell you that you don't need a permit. So we're really working on trying to sort of streamline and alleviate those permitting, I'll say, burdens, to really help promote and support this transition to relying more on human-beaver coexistence and non-lethal deterrent methods, as opposed to, jumping straight to depredation permits and lethal take where we've got viable alternatives. So a lot brewing over here in CDFW, a lot that we're trying to button up, finalize, make ADA compliant, and get rolled out onto the website so that these resources are available for those that are interested in installing deterrents or providing that technical assistance to landowners for installations. Really working on trying to get that streamlined. So, and with that, I think we will turn it back to Gray for next in the queue.
Thanks a bunch, Molly and Valerie. We had a moment, if there were questions that you all want to put in the Q&A box for Molly and Valerie, but I don't see any questions that are specific to you. So maybe we will encourage people to put questions in the Q&A box for in case there's time later on in this webinar for that kind of thing. And then in that case, we'll just forge ahead with Dave Cook. Dave Cook, welcome. Good morning.
All right, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Ken, loud and clear. Excellent.
Okay. I'm trying to get the slideshow going. Can you see the slides?
Not yet. No, we
Okay.
can't. And yeah, keep trying, and I will keep encouraging people. If you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A box, because chances are, if you're like me, the questions are fleeting and you think afterwards you wish you'd asked it. So put questions in the Q&A box. We'll hopefully get back around to it. And Dave Cook's
Okay.
working on sharing his screen.
Oh, you can't see it?
Nope. You have to hit the share screen thing. If you hit the green button, we get a notification that you're starting to share. So maybe hit the share
Hold on.
button yet.
I'm getting close.
All right. There we go. Now we have a notification that, yes, and there it is, and a beautiful night picture of beaver. You're on. Your slide's there.
All right. Give me just 1 second here.
Absolutely.
Guess that'll work.
And there
Okay.
we go. Yes.
So here we go. Hi, I'm Dave Cook. I work for Sonoma County Water Agency, and I'm going to be talking about how we're managing for beavers in our stream maintenance program. So the water agency has a stream maintenance program that manages approximately 89 miles of primarily urban streams. So these are channelized streams that usually run through communities. So they're relatively narrow strips of trapezoidal stream beds with adjacent walking path or maybe a dirt maintenance road. And then usually right next door to that is someone's backyard fence. So kind of a narrow area. And we have a number of different goals for this SMP. One is to reduce the risk of flooding and damages to adjacent properties. But we're also deeply involved with doing riparian restoration. Many of these urban streams were essentially denuded of vegetation decades or centuries ago. And now our goal is to restore kind of a mature riparian zone along these streams while still allowing the management of flood, primarily winter flood flows. And with that riparian restoration, we want to improve habitat conditions for fish and wildlife. And beavers are kind of like a new species that we're just starting to manage for. And that's what I'm going to really focus on this presentation. And in particular, so here's a map just showing where beavers are known to occur in Sonoma County. And this area where you see a lot of different blue dots, this is Sonoma Valley and along primarily Sonoma Creek. And but the water agency has flood control obligations throughout the county. So back in 2017, a pair of beavers started to occupy a small creek called Friar Creek, and right adjacent to Friar Creek is a small, even smaller tributary called the East Fork of Friar Creek. And within a couple of years, they had constructed a total of 4 dams and one bank lodge. And then just this year, just in the last couple of months, they've started to build a 5th dam, and they relocated their lodge. So let's talk a little bit about how we've been managing for beaver. We wanted to get a better understanding of the effects of the beaver dams on flooding and potential damage to adjacent properties. So we had Prudensky Chatham do some hydrologic analysis for us. And then we also wanted to talk to beaver experts. So we contacted Occidental Arts and Ecology and Swiftwater Designs, who helped develop a better understanding of what the beaver's needs are as far as habitat and their kind of behavior that we need to be sensitive or in managing. So out of this collaboration, we produce 2 documents. One's a very focused management plan for Friar Creek, and managing beavers along Friar Creek. And then the other report is more of a conceptual guidelines for managing for beavers should they become established in other parts of the SMP in those 89 miles. So we have kind of already a kind of a game plan because we're expecting beavers to become more established in more areas throughout the county and including our SMP sites. So let's talk a little bit about Friar Creek and the East Fork. This couldn't be more of an urban area. It is literally in downtown Sonoma, and both of the creeks just a few hundred yards upstream of where the beavers have been building their dams. The creek flows underground and goes underground throughout the city or under the city. So not quite sure why the beavers decided to take up residence in this area, but it is incredibly urban. So our first concern is like, what's the influence of these beaver dams on floodwaters, and will they cause damage to adjacent properties? But when we had the flood analysis done and we looked at different kind of flood events at different scenarios, what we really found was the beaver dams didn't have much influence on the elevation of floodwaters, largely because there was an undersized culvert that was really the main kind of influence on backwater. So the good thing is that as long as we could manage the beaver dams at their current elevation, we should be fine to keep the dams as they are. So here's a picture of that culvert. I'm actually standing on the beaver dam looking downstream, and this is really the throttle or the way that water flows are really restricted upstream in Friar Creek, and also the East Fork is really this culvert. And again, the beaver dams have little influence. However, we did want to maintain the beaver dams at their current elevation. So we installed pond levelers on all 4 dams. And our main goal was is we wanted to maintain a dirt access road that's adjacent to the creek to allow maintenance activity or maintenance vehicles and also emergency vehicles to get through. Uh, the irony was is we've been doing a lot of riparian restoration in these creeks, and there's one reason why the beavers moved in is because instead of just having kind of a linear landscape, we now had a well-established riparian zone, and the beavers started to gnaw a number of these trees. So we came in and we fenced off a number of the trees that really didn't provide a food source. So we were fencing primarily oak trees. You can see some beaver damage on one tree here on the left, and on the right is a fence tree. This photograph shows chicken wire. We actually have gone to a heavier gauge material to keep the beavers from gnawing on the larger oak trees. Another part of our management is to avoid the beaver lodge area, especially in the springtime when the kits are present. So we have a 100-foot kind of no disturbance zone, 100 feet upstream and downstream of the beaver lodge, where most of our maintenance consists of just doing vegetation management, usually mowing or weed whacking. And we just don't allow any vehicles through there during the springtime. So this is typically what we do is for fire protection, we have a crew go in and mow down usually the upper banks and adjacent to the maintenance roads. And we do that with weed whacking or on a small car like this. We've also done some public outreach. Initially, the neighbors were concerned that we were trying to kill or even or trap beavers. So we did a lot of outreach that no, we're trying to strike this balance between providing habitat for beavers, but also providing flood control services for adjacent property owners. So what we do is we have a number of locals that have expressed interest, and we notify them when we're going to do any activity out there. However, we have a policy of just a low publicity about the site. We don't want to create a kind of tourism of this area, largely because it's kind of in people's backyards, and we don't want to have just a flood of people going back there and then create kind of concerns from the locals of just too much human traffic. And we have had vandalism at the site, I'll talk about in a minute. So we do just keep a really low profile. We have some signs up. So if people are there, they understand that we are managing for beavers. Some people thought the pond leveler was actually a trap for beavers. We had to kind of explain that no, that's how we're managing the dam elevations. So our monitoring and maintenance consists of frequent inspections. We usually inspect at least once a month. We're out there just kind of seeing what the beavers are doing, checking for vandalism. We did camera monitoring until the cameras were stolen. And then we generally have to do pond leveler replacement or servicing pretty much every year. We've had one pipe was vandalized. We had one pipe that was lost. We're not quite sure if floodwaters just dislodged it or someone stole it. And then the beavers, they're pretty smart, and they kind of figure out kind of what's going on, and they've caused some damage or basically filling in our pond levelers. So here's just after a peak winter flow, you can see the pond leveler pipe that's within the beaver dam. They seem to be doing fine. We have one pond leveler on Dam 4 that was installed in 2017, and it's still working fine. We haven't had to do really any service to it. At Dam 1, we are on our third pond leveler. The first one silted in, the second one, the beavers filled it up, and the third one is the one we're working on right now that we'll be servicing probably tomorrow. So in 2023, we had our wildlife cameras going, and we got lots of photographs of the beavers. There's definitely an adult pair. We were able to document there are kits there at the site. And the site's used by a number of different mammals, including river otter and a lot of other mammals. Lots of birds we've documented using the site. And we documented pond slider on the wildlife camera, but I've also seen probably 3 or 4 northwestern pond turtles, which are our native turtle, using other ponds in the kind of pond system. As I mentioned, beavers have kind of done damage to our pond levelers, so we've kind of learned our lesson. We put one pond leveler cage that goes on the upstream part of the dam too close to the dam. The beavers figured out that water was flowing through there, and they just packed it full of mud. So we had to install a new one. I think I have a photograph of that. Yeah, so here we're installing a new pond leveler. We just abandoned the old one and put the next leveler, the inlet cage, just further upstream and in deeper water. And we also added more pipe to the downstream end. Let's see. Oh, just an update. So there's been lots of activity this spring. The beavers have shifted their lodge to the opposite side of the creek and a little bit further upstream, and they're using a eucalyptus trunk as their kind of anchorage, and they built a bank burrow. And they're starting on dam number 5, and we will be installing a pond leveler on that new dam tomorrow. And they've also gnawed down 2 oak trees, and they're working on a third tree. So we've just recently installed fencing to protect some of the larger oak trees. So currently, we're trying to keep everybody happy. Currently, we have kind of 2 beaver clubs, and there's lots of beaver lovers. The locals love to walk by and see the beaver dams, and if they're out in the morning or in the evening, sometimes they see the beavers. And we only have 2 people in the Beaver Hater Club currently, and their concerns is potential property damage from flooding. They're concerned about mosquitoes in the pooled water. However, all the ponds have mosquito fish. And then they also complain about the kind of smell coming off the ponds because of the marsh vegetation. And that's just part of having beaver habitat. We don't have any way of mitigating the smell. And I will leave you with Sonoma County Water Agency's old logo from, I think, the 60s or maybe early 70s that had a beaver on it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Great presentation. It's really nice to see how a water agency is working with beaver coexistence. I know that many of the human-beaver coexistence issues in California are coming from water agencies. So thanks for leading the pack, as it were, in addressing coexistence. We have a question from the audience. Andrew Manning was intrigued about your cameras being stolen and is wondering, were the cameras on land or in the water?
Yes, so our cameras, we had 2 wildlife cameras. One was on a tree in the middle of the beaver pond because the tree actually was drowned. It died because it was inundated. And then the other camera was on another tree on the stream bank, and both of those were stolen.
All right, thank you. And Benton Freedom, thanks for the question. Brock's answered it, but this came up during your presentation, Dave. Yeah, in your experience, are these beavers chewing trees of any diameter, or were they like leaving some and chopping down the big ones, or did you see a preference in diameters of what trees the beavers are taking or species?
No, I mean, we have like some multi-branched willows that they were very aggressive on, and the DBH of those, individual branches were maybe 3 or 4 inches in DBH, but they will take on, oak trees that are kind of 12 inches, 12, 15 inches in diameter. So, and those are basically our largest uh, planted oaks are those kind of 12-inch diameter trees.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. Let's see. Questions are coming in. So we actually have time for Riley Endry's question. One of the main complaints Riley's heard from people with implementing coexistence devices rather than removing beavers is the cost and upkeep of coexistence devices. And it seems like with dam number one that there might have been somewhat consistent with people's worries. Would you say are the trade-offs between costs and benefits and time and all that? Do you have any advice for Riley in the context for cost and maintenance worries?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as costs, the costs have been, kind of regular inspections. However, we have staff that are always inspecting all of our flood control facilities, so it's just kind of on part of their routine. And as far as maintenance work, it's really maintaining the pond levelers. That's probably the most effort. Um, and the materials probably cost a few $100 for a single pond leveler. It's basically hog wire paneling and 12-inch diameter piping. And you might have a crew of 2 or 3. I think we'll have 3 people out there tomorrow to install the pond leveler, and it'll probably take them most of the day. So, probably, I don't know, the inspections are a few hours, and maybe signing 1 or 2 days a year to do kind of pond leveler servicing is kind of what's needed, and maybe a couple hours for public outreach.
Mhm. And Kurt Schmiegel is adding to this question series. And is this like, are there seasonal maintenance requirements for these pond leveler devices, especially after flood events? How are they holding up during floods?
Well, the pond levelers are fine. I mean, the dams at this point are basically they're like concrete. They're not going anywhere. When the first year or two, they're pretty kind of spongy, but they're pretty solid. And in the wintertime, there's really nothing to do. The bulk of the flows are going over the dam in the wintertime. And the pond levelers only accommodate basically base flows, so basically summertime flows.
And they hold up through floods, the pond leveler devices?
Yeah,
Yep.
we haven't had any trouble. We had one dam blow out, and there was a pond leveler in the dam, so it blew out as well. But for the stable dams, pond levelers seem to do fine.
All right. Thanks, Dave, and thanks people for putting your questions in the Q&A box. This is important. We did set aside some time, but we do now need to move on to Damian Ciotti. You're up next.
Okay.
And then
Good morning.
audience, hang tight. We're going to go till 11:30, so just got about 40 more minutes before break. I know it's a long haul. Damian.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me, Gray.
Oh, glad you're here.
And how's my screen share going?
Let's see. It's loading. Just a minute,
Okay.
hopefully. Yeah, there it is. We got your first slide. It's there.
Okay, thank you. So my name's Damian Ciotti. I work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience with integrating cattle and beaver and stream restoration, which if anything, I can say it's pretty entertaining. So this is our site at Doty Ravine in the Sierra Foothills. Took this picture just a few weeks ago. I was out there with CDFW, but you can see the pretty large bank lodge we have on the left of the slide. right along Doty Ravine Creek there. And then, of course, a herd of cattle that has been managed out there for well over 10 years now. And I would say that rangelands are a really great place to integrate beaver restoration with working landscape. And today I just want to talk about some of the challenges we ran into and some of the strategies we use now to get these projects hopefully rolling off in the right direction. Let's see here. How do I, my slide is not advancing.
All right, let's see. If you take maybe the right arrow on your keyboard, try that.
Yeah, I did that.
Make sure your mouse is clicked on the slide, or just click your mouse on the slide. Try that one.
That's not working either.
Oh, okay. Or reshare, maybe. I'm not sure.
Let's see. Slides.
Testing. While you're
Oh,
doing.
there we go.
Okay.
How's
good.
that?
Well, there it is. So we see your
Okay,
name.
good.
Yes.
All right. I just had to click on I was clicking on the wrong slide. So yeah, I would call our early strategies fighting around the site. We had basic objectives for this restoration site. We wanted to reduce bank erosion that the cattle were causing along this incised stream. And so we were fighting the cattle back with fences. And then the beaver were building, we had beaver on this site. So the beaver were building dams within that creek, which was further weakening the banks, causing collapse. And of course, between the beaver and the cattle, they were eating a lot of the riparian vegetation that we were planting, trees and other veg to get that habitat going. So we were trapping out the beaver. So, just going around picking fights at this site, essentially. And that was until 2013. I started talking to the Placer Land Trust, and they that's when in 2014 we say they went forward with their Beaver Peace Treaty, and a very famous date, I think, in modern beaver history. But after they stopped trapping the beaver at the site, we started helping the beaver raise that water table on that floodplain. And of course, they did continue to gnaw and kill the trees, but at the same time, the raised water table obviously created other opportunities for riparian forests to grow. And so in places where we didn't anticipate, as they also, destroyed other riparian forest areas. But it was a large enough landscape where these, this different patches of forest and wetland habitat were a good thing. And essentially, what they really restored was this process of floodplain pulse floods and riparian production throughout that floodplain. And in doing so, the floodplain became, a really important sink and trap for fine sediment and for nutrients that really supported that vegetation growth, and also helped us with our objective of reducing fine sediment pollution that was attributed to the cattle. So now our stream is no longer this kind of straight pipe sending sediment and nutrients down the watershed, but really holding and storing that sediment and nutrients on the site. And by the way, our bigger objectives from the Fish and Wildlife Service standpoint were for migratory bird habitat, as well as anadromous fish for this site in particular is critical habitat for steelhead. So I want to just back up and talk about, looking at the landscape for looking where to do this type of project. And one thing we, want to look at is looking at the valley scale. where do we have space, and where do we have other land uses and infrastructure, kind of getting that on the map. And here we have a map of the Doty Ravine Creek system going down through the foothills. In yellow, you see what we mapped as that pre-disturbance valley bottom space that's been disconnected. And within that is that incised, very narrow channel valley that exists now. And you can see where our project site is there. And so if you go through and you do this mapping, and then along with in red, we have major infrastructure, whether that's roads, canals, ditches, levees. You can start to get a sense of land uses, of areas where there will be perhaps some mild constraints versus really rigid constraints to restoring beaver, not just within that incised channel, but really allowing them to get up on the landscape and create extensive habitat areas on the valley bottom is what we were looking for in terms of improving habitat. And then once you find an area, then you can drill down a little bit closer. There's a lot of valley bottom models out there. I tend to just use the LiDAR in the soils, get a good idea of what that pre-disturbance area was. And for our location at Doty Ravine, we see when we first started with the project, we had this very narrow stream corridor that was incised with levees and with a few roads along there as well. And mapping out the infrastructure as well as the land use. And then the bottom depicts the area where we eventually were able to reconnect the floodplain space. And you can make a projection like that of your site before the beaver reconnect that area. But the important thing is that you lay out that plan so that you can discuss those those potential changes with landowners, and work with those landowners if they're willing to perhaps modify that infrastructure as we did, and modify that land use as we did. And that doesn't happen overnight. That occurred over multiple years of working with those landowners, including the land trust and the cattle operator, who will Tracy Shore will speak next. But you can see in the bottom some of the activities we did over time. We breached some of these levees along here, built beaver dam analogs to reinforce existing dams, and then the beaver went to work within the channel and on the floodplain. So, really the bottom line is we're looking for areas where we can work with the beaver to encourage them to occupy, get the stream up out of these incised channels and occupy more space for habitat. This is a look at the valley bottom before it was reconnected. You can see here was our levee we removed, area here where we placed beaver dam analogs. But you can also see before the connectivity how within a cattle operation, how this, when the cattle did get into that creek, those nutrients and sediment were exported downstream. And then once we were able to connect that with the beaver, we had this much larger area of channel connectivity and floodplain vegetation that grew up. And so we moved our riparian fences back from that stream channel and brought those back to the valley edge. So basically we were just kind of managing the cattle, but basically managing the cattle from entering the valley bottom. I'm sorry, we weren't excluding them. We were just managing how much they were in that valley bottom. And in places we allow them in full time. And they have access to water in parts of that valley bottom. And again, where they do cause turbid or fine sediment issues, a lot of that is captured within this floodplain that is much more resilient than what that single channel historically was. And that is, that is maintained in large part by the beaver doing through the dam building throughout this whole entire 60-acre floodplain. So we did do build a lot of beaver dam analogs throughout the site. This particular site is actually in a meadow in the Sierra, but that was a really important part, especially early on when the dams were within the incised channel, reinforcing those dams. We built BDAs that beaver ended up occupying, and then we also built onto dams that they were not utilizing as much or abandoning. So it was both in terms of working with them on this. But I think a critical point with beaver dam analogs for me is just the work it requires to not so much build the structures, but maintaining that water table is really tough. That requires a lot of labor. And that is the most critical part. If beaver don't maintain their water table elevation, they don't get their plant production, they don't get their habitat, deep water habitat. Really a majority of their benefits kind of go out the window. The structures are still important. They provide habitat. They do some geomorphic work in the winter during floods, but really getting in there, if we're building BDAs, getting these things sealed up early enough into the spring or summer season to get that water table up so we do get the plant production, riparian veg production is really critical. So yeah, there are a number of challenges on the ground that we ran into, but I mean, nothing major. Tracy may have a different opinion on that, but certainly the beaver, they're going to move that water edge around the valley bottom. And you can't always be prepared for that. Here's riparian fence that ended up being flooded, gate areas, access areas that ended up being flooded. But we had marked these areas as, okay, we were willing to give these up and move them if we needed to. And so I can't stress enough also, I think, the importance of working with a conservation organization or an agency such as ours, where we can provide technical assistance and funding support to do some of this work, which of course for a private landowner is a major expense, having to move a riparian fence. For us, it's this is great. I mean, this is a pretty cheap project for us relative to our standard kind of bigger restoration constructions. If we simply have to move some fencing around to get this extensive wetland and stream restoration, then it's a really good deal, and we can provide technical assistance for this as well. And lastly, I just want to emphasize with beaver restoration that it's these projects aren't they're really holistic. I would really approach a beaver restoration like any restoration. We're really looking at infrastructure and land use and thinking about that and addressing those issues up front before we really start working on the beaver end, I think. And so, I have some photos here of the first year where we first installed at Doty Ravine, we installed beaver dam analogs at the site, and that got the landowner, Placer Land Trust, more engaged into what beaver dams do in the stream. And then we also removed some of that, started removing levee material from the floodplain. and allowed that stream to migrate some after installing that beaver dam analog in year one. And then year two, we built that beaver dam out further. Again, the beaver had not occupied that dam yet, but we were starting to reconnect at the floodplain at that location, even without the beaver. And then by year three, the beaver occupied that structure, and they maintain it now. It's one of the main areas that the incised channel is now connected to the floodplain with. And so anyway, yeah, in conclusion, just really incorporating this idea of adaptive management over time and working with the landowner over time is really critical with these projects as well. So that's all I have. Again, I want to plug our programs, Partners for Fish and Wildlife and Coastal Restoration Programs. We can help you with your cattle, beaver, stream restoration project pretty much anywhere in the state of California. So send me an email if you're interested or want some assistance.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, great presentation. Amazing to see this connectivity between the beavers and the floodplain and your work and offer for assistance more broadly. Yeah, the listeners are interested in getting in touch. There's Damien's email address, and also you can contact our Beaver Coexistence program and we can put you in touch. We're thinking there's a lot of synergy between ranching and such work, but let's hear from a rancher. Tracy's up next to give her perspective on the cattle side. Is it possible to do these things? How much work is it for other ranchers? Thank you for being here, Tracy. Good to see you.
Hello, does this work? Can you see
It
everything?
does. Yep,
Great,
yep.
great.
We're hearing you.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tracy Shore, and I am a livestock and natural resources advisor. And today I'm here with a little bit of two hats as a rancher and a University of California Cooperative Extension livestock and natural resources advisor. And so as a rancher, just a little bit about ourselves. This is my other half, Ryan Imbach, and our son, Colton. And like many ranching families in California, particularly, we also have off-farm jobs. Mine is with Cooperative Extension, working on livestock topics, something I am passionate about and interested in, and have been in this field of bringing ranching and conservation together for over 20 years. And also he does ag trucking. And so both of us grew up in 4-H and in FFA together, which is how we met. I had taken a path at Chico State and UC Davis and participated in the development of the California Rangeland Conservation Coalition and had worked in that field prior to coming in Extension. And Ryan is a graduate of Texas Tech with a degree in animal science. And so our son is part of our ranching operation. And you can see that in the pictures there, is with us when he's not in school, out there raising cattle as well. So just a little bit, let me make sure we go, about Dottie Preserve and the grazing program. So we started taking an active role in the management in his family's cattle at Dottie in 2011, and we were working with Justin Wages. And Justin and I had known each other through the California Rangeland Conservation Coalition, which those of you who might not be familiar, it's a partnership of ranching and environmental organizations, which is how I met Gray as well. And so the grazing at the preserve is seasonal grazing. So it's very typical of California, as the cattle are migratory in most in the state. And so the grazing there historically had been sometime in November, late November, depending on when there was rainfall that came through about mid-May, depending on, again, that rainfall year. And the parcel has two grazing units. There's the north unit, which has vernal pools, some oak woodlands on it, more of a natural landscape, I would say, some star thistle challenges that we've worked with together on to address with the land trust. And then the south side had been farmed historically, and so does have some native grasslands or annual grasslands of California and some restored fields as well that is there. And so there's been this historic collaboration before this project started that was through the coalition, like I mentioned, looking at burrowing owl habitat on the site, oak plantings, native plantings where they did where we would seasonally time graze it with them. And so I think, we had worked through some of these challenges, and Damien talked about historic challenges on the site with the cattle accessing. And so before we got there, the land trust had taken a low bid. So I think this is a lesson learned, a low bid to build a fence. And when you don't put in the money to create a fence that actually can permanently exclude cattle, there's challenges, right? They could get in there. It wasn't really good access. Like you talked about, it was right on the stream edge. It was trying to create a riparian exclosure versus a managed riparian zone. They tried putting in some offsite watering systems, which wasn't really reliable, and especially in a drought, caused a lot of stress and angst for us because the system wasn't working. They'd used a local guy, which I totally support, but when the water isn't working and the float system doesn't work, so there were some challenges. And so we had worked through all of these other challenges before this opportunity on the restoration with the beaver came about. And so why is there grazing? I don't want to forget that is, the grazing on the site, I mentioned some of them, the burrowing owls, the vernal pools, raptors, and really controlling invasive weeds. And that also comes now, which is more prevalent than it was in 2011 when we started, is the fire risk as well. And so why is this project successful? And I think there's really 5 things that made it successful. One, we're a leasee, right? And so in California, there's a lot of challenges and it's hard to get access to grazing land. And so as a leasee that had a good relationship, we wanted to keep that relationship, right? So we had a vested interest in working with the land trust to make sure of a good outcome. 2, we were part of that project design. And I think from those conversations that we talked about, those challenges, the fencing, as you can see here, we worked with them on where to put the fence, the type of fence that was put in. There was smooth wire on the top and the bottom, the barbed wire in the center, using a heavier gauge that would help keep bulls and calves from getting through that fence, because before they were jumping through one of the historic fence on the other side. So we were part of this project design, where we were going to put the fences at, where we were going to locate them, the angles, where we were going to put access gates, making sure we had dual access gates for where we did a stream crossing. And then Damien showed that picture of the excavator or the bobcat down there working, and we were a partner in the project. And so Ryan spent weekends down there and evenings taking out actually that levee system and was a vested partner. And I think that makes real success is if you bring in the grazer or the landowner as part of that, right? Instead of a third party. And so we did part of that project with them of building the fence and actually, which was an alternative revenue for our family as well, as, alternative income as part of getting that project put in. And then the 4th benefit that we've seen there is like an extended grazing season. So unfortunately, many grazing leases in California have these hard dates, especially on annual grasslands of like November 1st through May 31st, despite what happens. And so, when we get these late rains, it can cause star thistle challenges and medusa head and additional fire fuel loads. And so with this project, we've actually been able to increase our grazing season because we go into that riparian area. Like Damien said, it's not a riparian exclosure. It's more of a riparian pasture. And so we time it. So we're actually able to lengthen out our grazing season. There's reliable water, where he talked about those water gaps that we're able to access water, which is reliable and not just relying on off-stream water, which can have tons of benefit. There's lots of data and research behind off-stream water values, but there's also, in a drought year, and if that's the only source and something goes awry, it's hard, right? The cattle are out of water and that's a challenge. And so having dual water systems was really important on that. And then I think the 5th one is flexibility. And that's the main one of when we were implementing the project and now as we're living with the outcomes of the project as the grazer on the site. And so there's a picture of the historic cattle crossing where we crossed there, and that's Ryan pushing the head from the south unit up to the north unit across the ravine there. And then if we reflect back on what Damien shared us, it looks a little bit different, right? There's a lot of water there. And what does a lot of water look like? that is what a lot of water looks like. And that is not an easy time to move cattle. And so, especially when the cows are fall calvers, which means they have babies on their side, right? So we don't swimming in the winter time for cows is a challenge, right? Like they have small calves by their side, you get pneumonia risk, you getting through there as the rancher to push them across, right? 50 years ago, we probably could have put them on a road and gone across the bridge and gone around, but there's 55, people go 55 miles an hour right there in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. So that is not an option. And so I think that flexibility really came in working with Damien or with Elias, who's at the land trust now, as we're implementing this, and Justin early on, is like, okay, we're looking at the weather forecast. You're looking at grass growth, right? Like this is a challenge. Like how much grass is it going to grow? What's your sunshine? What's the rainfall? What's the upstream downflow? Like you're balancing all of this. And there have been times where we've had to call Elias and be like, we can't, like we want to move the cows, but we can't move the cows. So can we give them some supplemental feed? Because we have 3 weeks of extensive rain. In a drought year, yeah, it's easy to move them back and forth, but in high rainfall that continuously comes, sometimes it can be a challenge where we've put out extra protein tubs. We've talked about it of like, hey, we know we need to move them, but we need the water's got to recede some before we're able to move them. And so I think having that a good relationship works where we can have that conversation, but also the land trust recognition of like, okay, we might put a little bit more pressure than what we wanted to on either the north end or the south end because we can't move across because of the flood zone that's there. And so historically, I would tell you, just reflecting back what it looked like it would go 1 or 2 days and that water would recede. It's very different now that there's this bigger riparian area and the beaver analogs in there. So there's more water throughout the year, but there's also a lot more water that's deeper during those winter months as well. And that's something that we have to balance as the grazer. And there we go. So I think wrapping this all up of like, what are these coexistence pieces? And maybe putting on my cooperative extension hat a little bit here is, how can you make it what's that compatibility with the current land use? And like Damien said, there's, I think opportunities could be on some of these annual grassland, rangeland, cattle sites to create more of this habitat. But I think you have to balance what we talked about. What are some of those challenges and what are the trade-offs and how can these projects be designed, right? Because beavers can take some instructions, but they don't take the engineering plans and implement them in exactly how you want necessarily. And so how can you work within that system? What are the downstream impacts in water users? And so I have some pictures on there, and I think one of them, being, are you plugging up water? Like, do the downstream ag users need water? Is the water able to pass through? What is the amount? Are they getting the head that they need to irrigate, which is an important thing? If it's a trickle longer, that's okay, you have water more of the season, but is it enough to actually irrigate a pasture without the pressure that can come with additional water early in the year? What are these ag lands, right? Like, are you going to flood out ag lands? And I think that goes to part down later about a good neighbor, right? Like, is the beaver going to go try to eat the orchard? Are you going to flood a hay field that doesn't need to be flooded at the wrong time? And so I think there's all these other challenges that come about. And I think it's something that we talked about early on with Justin as well. Like, okay, well, if this blocks up water, does that get us in trouble with the downstream water users? What are the water rights? And some of these, there's a decree on there, and there's a picture of Sierra Valley where it states in their water rights that are pre-1914 that a rancher can't block water, like they can't impede stream flows. So I think that's something also, in these projects, the landowner may have their hands tied because there's something that sets precedent over the top of current activity as well. And is it an irrigation system, or is it a creek or a ravine like it was in this case? And I think, the challenges have come up there before, like the beavers can do a lot of damage. There's a flashboard there that was an overnight flashboard, right? And when you're bringing in beavers to ag systems, there can be a lot of those economic challenges. And how can, you have funding to do the project, but also funding to mitigate those unintended consequences. And time does cost money, right? Like the ranchers are the only ones that show up to the project or the meetings that aren't getting a paycheck to be there. And I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind. When doing these projects of like, how can ranchers be compensated to be at the table and part of the conversation? And I think, it works when you're the leasee, right? Like you're putting in extra effort to get to it. But So I think it's just another part to put in the conversation when you're trying to bring these projects to the table, right? To work with producers. And I think that where it comes to that balanced approach, can the end project be something that is ranching and grazing compatible? Is there a funding element in this one with Partners for Fish and Wildlife? Maybe it's NRCS, maybe it's private funds, maybe it's mitigation dollars, maybe it's something through Healthy Soils Initiative with CDFA that's new, that could come in and fund that equipment and infrastructure, because it does take time and money to redesign a system as you're making changes to it. And then the third element is bringing in that balance of the landscape impact and the community outlook. And so I think, how do you bring all those together? And I think our project worked a lot too, because I was playing that intermediary ground. And so I think maybe, do you need someone in the middle that can help make that conversation? So between Ryan and Justin Wages, sometimes I would have to be a facilitator and put on my extension hat or an RCD hat, right? And how can you bring in those external partners to maybe help get you across the finish line to figure out, oh, well, if we can just change the fencing to be here and add some additional gates, it could work for both sides and build in that flexibility. And so, yeah, so I think it's been a good project for us. Like I said, there's a lot of benefit to it, but there's also some challenges. But with collaboration and conversation, it's something that we've been able to work through easily with the land trust to make it a win-win for ranching and restoration.
All right. Thank you, Tracy. We have a question from Amy Merrill for you, Tracy. Have you seen any benefits for increased forage in these areas where beavers have modified hydrology?
So I did have a note on that, but I think I forgot to say it. But yeah, so in that riparian area where Damien showed the picture of them kind of removing some of those levee systems, there is actually more sub-irrigation. We did lose some because it became a pond, but I think there's the cattle would eat the vegetation along the ponding system, but we actually had more reliable water with the pond as well during during the drier season, as we kept the cattle there longer to control the non-native annuals. So yeah, we did see some, it was almost like a sub-irrigated pasture in that area where the levees were taken out. So it had some good forage quality towards the end of the season as the annual grasses senesced.
Thank you, and thanks.
Do I have time for one more? There was another question about the fire.
Go ahead.
I saw, and yeah. I had a note to mention that. And so putting on my extension hat, one of the things that we talk about in this disaster preparedness for farmers and ranchers is, where's your retreat zone, right? And so I think in this case, if there was a fire there in June, which we're already getting fires in the system right now, and we still had cattle there, someone could easily cut the fence and push the cattle into that pasture area, and they would be safe from a fire. So I think it is a resiliency strategy, as just like irrigated pasture would be. Where could you put the cattle when you can't get a semi-truck there to move them? Because, there's 2 semi-truck loads of cattle there. You can't find a semi-truck, get the cattle in a corral and get them loaded by the time a fire gets there. But it could be something easy that, the neighboring rancher who might be right there, or the land trust, or even the firefighters could cut the fence, and the cattle would naturally go in there because they like the water, right? And it would be hot in summertime. And so I think it can provide a fire resiliency and also a fire break if it was blowing either north to south or south to north, depending on the wind. It would be a buffer to stop that fire from getting into that urban wildland interface that is where this site is located.
Thanks, Tracy. And you get another question. Anonymous attendee is asking, did you all completely rest the riparian area for veg establishment at first, or did you rotate cattle in from the beginning strategically? This probably has to do with creating beaver food, right? Like, how did you make the way for beavers to be able to settle there in terms of forage availability?
So when they were there early, and like Damien was talking about, they were fighting the system, I may have ran over a couple oak trees, and I would have to call and apologize for running over oak trees in this before it was a flooded area in wetlands, because they were trying to restore oak. So at that time, we were out of there. We were only in there a little bit, and so it was a negotiation process, because there was actually so much thatch buildup and invasive weeds. They were wanting to decrease that competition to let the oaks get hold. And so the oaks were caged, and like we only went in there with half the head of cattle and later in the season. So it's timed grazed. It's not, they don't have full access to it's a riparian pasture. So it's managed as essentially a third grazing unit on the site.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead.
I was just going to add the cattle generally weren't grazed in the summertime either. So it was basically from like October till May or so. So there was a rest there.
Yeah. So we typically, and also they had not wanted us in there when it was a higher flow, and we didn't want to be in there. So I think they usually flash grazed it once in May for like a week or two, and then in June again. But again, that depends on the season and the weather and the rainfall. So yeah, they're in there for a few days at different times.
All right. Thank you. And Damien, you get a question from Ben, who's asking, in these anadromous waters you're working in, how did you go about getting the correct permitting to build channel spanning structures? This person's had challenges in San Luis Obispo getting such approvals for process-based restoration.
Yeah, I mean, we worked with National Marine Fishery Service, just like any ESA consultation. This is critical habitat for steelhead at this site. So, yeah, just worked with your regulators. If you have each site's going to be different. We had a lot of lateral valley space, so we were creating secondary channels. And I think, I mean, these structures, these even though they're channel spanning, if they're built out of site materials, natural materials, they should change over time. They're not built to like as a dam. During a flood event, they may blow out. They may get additional channels around them. So these are things that many regulators, I believe, understand now. But yeah, that wasn't an issue here.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Damien and Tracy. Nice case study for people. Hopefully people understand that context and the landscape of California and how frequently those kinds of projects could happen with a little innovation and support. Again, thank you, Damien, for offering that support, and Tracy for your perspective in interacting with this project. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 11:40. My experience has been that it's a long time for people to sit without taking a break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. I will give you some noise about a minute before we start again. But in the meantime, we're on break. Yep, thank you for starting the recording again, Andros. And next up, it's Aaron Hall checking in from Canada. Welcome, Aaron. Glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Greg. Can you all hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear. We've got there we go. Your slide is up.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Greg, and thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am Aaron Hall. I'm the Beaver Core Program Director at the Beaver Institute. Excited to tell you just a little bit about the Beaver Core program today and how you can get involved if you choose to do so. So a little bit of history about Beaver Core. So Beaver Core is Beaver Institute's flagship program. It is our professional non-lethal beaver management course, and it's based upon the 2 decades of experience of our founder, Mike Callahan's experience dealing with beaver conflicts in Massachusetts and New England. So Mike was generous enough to realize, over the course of his work that he would like to share his knowledge with others. He created the Beaver Institute and Beaver Core as a way to get, this beaver coexistence knowledge out to a larger, wider audience so that there could be more practitioners out there in the field doing this beaver coexistence work and teaching landowners to learn to live with beaver on their landscape instead of fighting against them. And as Mike said in this little quote, like, you might not resolve 2,000 conflicts, but we'll give you the tools to resolve the conflicts that you encounter. Beaver conflicts tend to fall into a couple very general categories that we've, alluded to at various times already today, but, there's generally tree felling. This picture on the left is, a landowner who has a single tree that's been taken down. This picture on the top is a golf course where several trees have been taken out adjacent to one of their fairways. This picture on the bottom is a landowner whose backyard is being flooded directly by a beaver dam. And this picture on the right is a culvert that a beaver is damming up. And beaver damming culverts is actually the most common beaver-human conflict that we encounter. Because if you think about it from a beaver's perspective, a culvert is just a small hole in an otherwise very functional dam as far as they're concerned. So it's very minimal work for a beaver to dam a culvert and get a nice pond of water behind that. And that's exactly what they want to do. The good news is that, as we've talked about already today, like there are solutions to all of these conflicts and problems. And that's what Beaver Core seeks to teach our students is, how to deal with these conflicts and have long-term solutions on the ground for landowners. So the Beaver Core curriculum is divided into two separate parts. The first part is online coursework through our online learning platform. And we tell people that takes about 40 to 60 hours for each student. It just depends, how fast a student learns, what their background is coming into it, how much they want to review, how much they get distracted by, side projects or side information or deep dives on various things that they learn throughout the course. It's divided up into 6 units. At the end of each unit, there's a quiz that's short answer that we grade personally. And then at the end of all that, there's a big final exam that we also grade. It's completely self-paced. You are completely on your own as far as how quickly or how slowly you want to go through the curriculum. We have some students who plow through it in a couple of weeks. We have some students who just do it gradually over the course of a year. It's completely up to you. The coursework is available 24/7 on the website whenever the whimsy hits you. Once you've completed your online coursework, part 2 of Beaver Core is the mentored installation. So that's the in the ground or on the ground work. So our students are responsible for finding landowners who are willing and able to, work with our students on these beaver conflicts. And the way that we engage with them is our students go out and do a site assessment based on our methods. Then we have an online meeting with them, talk about what they saw, what their proposed design is, give them some hints and tips of things that, probably work a little better because every one of these is extremely site specific. Then our students go out, do that installation, and then we meet with them afterwards as well to talk about, what went well, what didn't go well, what happened that you didn't anticipate, how can we learn from that for the next one. And we do that for the first 4 installations for each of our students. And we do that for 2 reasons. One, Beaver Institute and Beaver Core, we want to make sure that the people out there doing this work are doing it correctly and doing it in a way that is a long-term sustainable solution. So we want to have confidence that our people are out there doing good work, but we also want our students to have confidence that when they're talking to landowners and approaching people, that they have the confidence to, know that they have incorporated the coursework into the practical side of things and are confident in doing this properly. Once you've completed your 4 mentored installation projects, you have completed the program and you are then certified through Beaver Institute as a certified Beaver Coexistence professional. Just a quick look at some of the topics that we covered during the training. These are the units, so intro to beaver conflicts and job safety. Of course, job safety is a big important part of this. You're doing in the water work, you're doing in the field work, you're working with hand tools. Like there's lots of job safety things that you need to consider. Obviously, the conflict resolution techniques that Kate went over briefly at the beginning of this talk. We go way, way into detail on all of those and when they're applicable and when they're not, and circumstances of when you would use one over the other, et cetera, including maintenance. Beaver habitat restoration, we have an introductory unit on that for anyone who's interested. Site assessment and data collection. What do you need to measure? What do you need to record when you're out doing a site assessment on a landowner's property to try and figure out, is beaver coexistence an option here? And if so, what type of beaver coexistence makes the most sense? Regulations and adaptive management. business skills for people that are doing this as a standalone business or as part of an existing business. That's an important component of this. And then specific to the California program, what California specific regulations might apply to the permitting side of your projects, some case studies that walk through the permitting, and some California specific techniques like the beaver backsaver that we saw earlier. For anyone interested in applying and joining Beaver Core, you can just go to our website, go over to Beaver Programs and click on Beaver Core. That would take you to our landing page where you'll find all the information about the program, including the application materials. Here's just the top of the application. And yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say. Again, if you have any questions or interest about the program, definitely reach out to myself or our program coordinator, Carla. Or if you hit that QR code, that'll take you to our website to learn more. And yeah, we're excited for this collaboration in California with Occidental. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks a bunch, Aaron. Yeah, everybody, I promised you the QR codes, and our Beaver Coexistence Training and Support Program has scholarships available for people who intend to be professionals, to make it part of their business or to make a new business. Hit that QR code. Your next stage is to apply, and Aaron will review your application and we'll see if you can fit into this scholarship program to pay for your training for now. Thanks a bunch, Aaron, for all your support and mentorship for me and our team here in California. What a great partnership with the Beaver Institute and all of that experience you share for our California program. We're going to roll over to Cooper for some reflections on what it's like to have gone through the program. And why? Why did you do it, Cooper?
Mm-hmm. Well, hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me. Can you all see my slide?
Your slide just came up and you're coming in loud and clear. Yep.
Sounds good. So my name is Cooper Linehart. I founded Nature's Engineers, which is a beaver coexistence and process-based restoration business in San Luis Obispo, and we serve the Greater Central Coast. And so I wanted to talk to you today about how and why I made beaver restoration my career and my experience with the Beaver Core program through the Beaver Institute. So a little background, what first initially got me into beavers was not beavers themselves, but it was climate change. And so I was interested in finding out a way to basically suck carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil. And so originally I was thinking I would engineer synthetic trees that could store CO2 from the atmosphere and just cost, just a few $100 billion, and we could have a bunch of synthetic trees to do it. And so I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo for environmental engineering and kind of eventually learned that our natural ecosystems can be our greatest allies in storing carbon. And wetlands in particular are the most efficient land ecosystem at absorbing and storing atmospheric CO2. So once I learned that, I decided, okay, wetland restoration, that's the path that I want to go down. And so I reached out to some Cal Poly professors, did some small scale wetland restoration projects, weeding out invasive plants and things like that. And then eventually I got connected to this new group in San Luis Obispo called the Slow Beaver Brigade. And beavers had been coming up in my wetland research, so I decided to check them out. And that was my first introduction to beavers in person was on this field tour in the Atascadero Salinas River Beaver Complex. Dr. Emily Fairfax came and led a tour with the Slow Beaver Brigade. So the picture on the left here is this half-mile wide dry floodplain. This was August of 2020. It was during the drought. And it's just this fire-prone, crunchy floodplain. And it could not have been more different from the beaver wetland complex that we entered. Once we got into the riparian zone where the beavers were, it was lush and green. There was a full pond of water over 100 feet wide. It was just full of life. And I realized in that moment, this is what an amazing carbon sink this is, but it's also so much else at the same time. It's fire protection, groundwater recharge, a biodiversity hotspot, improves the water quality. So I realized in that moment that if I could support the beavers, that would be the most beneficial thing I could do for the climate. And I also realized that this was actually the natural, healthy state of our rivers and streams. They're not these single thread channels, they're actually these wetland complexes. And so it made a lot of sense how, when this country was full of beavers, North America was about 20% wetlands. And then after all the beavers were hunted, now we have less than 2% wetlands. And so that's the current state of the world we're living in. And now that we're bringing beavers back, we can hopefully increase that wetland habitat again. So after this, I immediately started volunteering with the Beaver Brigade, and then got brought on as an employee. And so Audrey, the founder of the Beaver Brigade, had been watching the beavers for the past 15 years or so, and noticed that they needed a lot of support in different areas. So there was a lot of trash in the river, so we started doing river cleanups. People were running over beaver dams with their vehicles, ATVs, right in the riverbed. And so we started leading educational tours and started putting caution tape up around the beaver dams to educate people on the importance of beavers and help discourage them from using it recreationally. And what we also noticed was that landowners who had beavers in the river on their property didn't want the beavers there, and they wanted them relocated. So they'd go to California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And at that time, it wasn't legal to relocate beavers. Beavers had to be lethally removed. So that's what happened in these spots. That same beaver dam I showed you the last slide, the beavers were removed in 2017. And since it was a good habitat, new beavers moved back into that same area. So it really wasn't solving the landowner's problem, and beavers had to die unnecessarily, I believe. So that was the impetus for me to want to learn beaver coexistence so that we could offer those services on the Central Coast. So that's when I was able to get a local grant from a company in San Luis Obispo called Biodiversity First, and they funded my tuition for the Beaver Corps program. And so that's how I got involved in the Beaver Institute. And I had a really good experience with my Beaver Institute training. So first was the online portion, and I would do this just after work. I was able to do, there was maybe 16 lessons total over the 6 main categories, and I was able to do 1 to 3 lessons per week. So I finished the program in about 2 months' time. And I learned a lot. It was really simple. I could download it onto my devices, highlight important things. I still have all these files, so I go back to them actually pretty regularly to check on all the information that was provided. I learned a lot about beaver basics and what kind of habitats they need, food sources they need, as well as what's the common reason for the conflicts, whether it's flooding property or chewing trees, and then, of course, all the specifics about the coexistence devices. But also there was sections on like business advice, how to start your own business, what are the important things to think about, where the time sinks. They also provided great materials lists, tool lists, permitting pathways, and even site assessment sheets like this culvert data sheet here. So I have a sheet ready for when I go out to a site assessment. I can just make sure I check all these boxes, do these measurements. So it was very helpful. And so once I completed that online version of the part 1, then I was now a Beaver Corps member, and I could attend these online monthly meetings where you can ask questions with other Beaver Corps members. There's usually different topics that they cover at each of these meetings. So great resource, and all of them are recorded. So I highly recommend, if you're going through this program, attend those meetings, or at least watch them later and see what kind of information you can get. It's a lot of great advice from other practitioners who are running into specific problems. So after the online portion was next to do the in-person installations. And so in San Luis Obispo, I had a bit of a hard time finding places to do the installs, just because there are less beavers here than on the East Coast, but also the way that people were dealing with these beavers was lethally removing them. So there wasn't the framework for people to want to coexist with beavers. And so that's gradually starting to increase. And so I decided that I want to get actual hands-on experience so that I can actually perform these installations and feel competent doing so. They do have online mentoring, which is another great tool, but I decided that I had the time in the summer last year to go to Massachusetts and train with Beaver Solutions, Mike Callahan and John and the crew. And it was really a great experience. I spent 4 days out there, installed lots of different kinds of coexistence devices. So, pond leveler devices, both through standing beaver dams and through culvert fencing, doing different keystone culvert protective fences. We also went around and did a lot of maintenance on existing coexistence devices that they had put in. So that was good to see how long they last, what it takes to do maintenance. I got a rundown of their whole truck setup, everything that they had and needed. It was great to have some people there that could really just teach me all the little minute details that I needed to learn how to do these devices. So yeah, I was a little nervous at the start of the week, unsure how capable I'd be of creating these devices, but I really gained a lot of confidence throughout just the few days that I was working with them. It's very doable stuff. It's pretty intuitive once you have the right materials and you understand the goal of what you're trying to do. I felt very capable of putting in these devices. So yeah, I'm bringing these tools back to California so that I now feel ready to do some Beaver Coexistence installations and just a couple more before I'm officially certified as a Beaver Core installer. So yeah, I'm excited to bring these tools back to the greater Central Coast and even possibly the Central Valley. And so, in the meantime, in between my beaver coexistence trainings, I was able to start a Nature's Engineers, this restoration business, where in addition to beaver coexistence, I also offer process-based restoration services, basically mimicking beavers to restore stream health. And so we build these human-made beaver dams called beaver dam analogs to start slowing the water down. Lots of these creeks uh, had run perennially, had running water all year round, and now because of the degradation, they don't hold water all throughout the year. So if beavers would try to move into these areas, they'd have a hard time. So we're building lots of these BDA structures to hold more water, encourage more riparian veg growth, so that it's easier for beavers to move back into these areas. So the idea is we're trying to improve the habitat so that beavers can expand their population and then increase their population. And as the beavers continue to expand and increase their population, they're inevitably going to run into more human infrastructure areas. And so then there will be need for beaver coexistence. And then we can implement the beaver coexistence so the beavers can stay where they are, continue benefiting these creeks and the areas directly adjacent to them, and allow the landowners to not have to worry about infrastructure problems. And then when those beavers are able to persist and continue breeding, their population continues to increase and expand and improve the habitat. And so it's just this positive feedback loop, which will inevitably lead to a wetter, more resilient Central Coast. And that's really the goal. And so here's a map of current beaver locations in SLO County. It's actually a little outdated. I think it's more locations now. But we've seen just in the past 4 or 5 years that we've been studying the beavers that they've been expanding their populations and entering new watersheds that they haven't been for 100+ years. So some areas, especially in South County, like they're in Pismo Creek, Arroyo Grande Creek, and we know there's a lot of human infrastructure in those areas. So I think it's only a matter of time before they start plugging up culverts, and we're going to need some beaver coexistence solutions there. And I think we're capable of implementing them so that the beavers can stay and maintain healthy wetland complexes. In SLO County, we have 25 watersheds, and within that, 264 sub-watersheds. So there's a lot of opportunity for beavers to expand and hold more water on the landscape, and a lot of opportunities for us to coexist with them all along the way. So I've been dreaming of, what does a wetter, more resilient Central Coast look like? And hopefully it'll be full of beavers. So yeah, thank you to the Beaver Institute for all this great training. I'm excited to put this to work on the Central Coast. Thank you all.
Thanks a bunch, Cooper. And there's Cooper's information. Let's leave that slide up for a minute, Cooper, so people can take that information down. And then I will also read a question. Maybe Cooper, you can take this one first, and maybe Aaron can weigh in on is larger scale reflections. Shayla Spiva is asking, I typed in an answer. Hey folks, hopefully you participants can see the questions that were answered. Anyway, I did type in an answer, but would love your perspective as well, Cooper. Is there a need for more people to be trained for this? Shayla's worried that trying to do this for a career, maybe like there's already a flood of people training for it. And is there room? Is there space in this profession for more people to join? What do you think, Cooper?
I think definitely. I think we're very much at the beginning of this industry of beaver coexistence in California. So right now, maybe there's just a few smaller companies that are doing it, and people are just starting to realize that it's a possibility to do this with beaver coexistence. So I think it's only going to grow from here. And with my business, for example, I'm the only one currently trained on beaver coexistence, but I can't be everywhere all the time. So I need to hire some more people who go through these beaver trainings and are capable of doing this coexistence. And I think, a company like mine can be replicated in every county throughout California. So I think it's very necessary to get more people with this training.
All right. Thanks, Cooper, for that perspective. I want to ask Aaron to weigh in on that as well. Have you seen, I think the Beaver Institute has seen startups like this around the nation. And what's your perspective on that question, Aaron?
Yeah, thanks, Gray. I mean, obviously, my perspective is similar to Cooper's. Like, I think we could easily have plenty more people out there doing this work, and we're trying to train plenty more people to do this work. You know, our lofty goal that we say is we want to have a Beaver Corps student within 2 hours of any Beaver conflict in North America. That's kind of our goal, and we're not anywhere close to that. So we've got lots of geographic holes to fill in to get to that point. But yeah, we want any landowner who has a beaver conflict to have someone that they can call and talk to within a reasonable distance. And we're pretty far away from that still. So in my view, still plenty of space to grow this industry.
Thank you. Thanks. Any of our other panelists want to tackle that question as well?
I'll chime in a sec. I also appreciate Cooper's acknowledgement that in addition to the tools in the toolbox that he's dealing with for beaver coexistence, is that's a component of these larger process-based restoration visions around the watershed. And so expanding the scope of offerings, if you will, within this workforce training arena to watershed restoration, low-tech process-based restoration, and where appropriate, in the response to the fact that we've had de-beavering and there's all this interest in re-beavering, sometimes we have to pre-beaver so we can just be beaver. And that's kind of the combo of the full spectrum here.
Oh, thank you. All right. Anybody else on the panel want to answer that? It's an interesting question, right? As manager of the Beaver Coexistence Program, I've been getting it. And so it's nice to get all of your perspectives and your history in seeing this movement build very quickly for California and around the world. Now is the time we can take questions from anyone, for anyone, by anyone, additional comments by our panelists. I know our panelists have been super busy answering. What have we answered? 58 questions so far today. And I know some of those questions you might want to, like those who typed answers might have heard those questions before. So I'd like to open it to the panelists. If you typed a question to somebody, is there something there that you'd like to, verbalize and make the group aware of, outside of that typing? And then I want to also encourage people that, have questions, that it's a good time to type them into the Q&A box because we have some time here. And so, yep, as on cue, questions are coming in. I will ask a question from an anonymous attendee. It says, and I'll do this, and you panelists really think about some of the questions that come up, that you've answered that you might want to tell the whole group about. Here's a start though. It seems like there is a lot of speculation about beaver populations increasing and maybe concerns about more beaver conflicts. Has anyone done any studies on whether repeat trapping of beavers could cause populations to become less territorial and create a greater density of beaver colonies across the landscape? Anybody know about beaver biology enough to answer that? We're not. Yep. Okay. Some Molly's on. Yeah.
Hello. Oh,
Okay. Up. Molly, you're on mute. Okay. No.
can you
Yes.
hear me now?
Yes. Now I
Okay.
can. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to my knowledge, that study has not been done. At the state, we are trying to gather as much information we can about current distribution of beavers, and we have a tool on our website where you can report sightings, which helps us understand current distribution. But yeah, in terms of a study on repeat trapping causing beavers to become less territorial, I'm not sure that that has been done. So, opportunity for a research project.
Thanks very much. All right. Let's see. So Kurt Schmiegel is asking, is there approximate time frame for when the self-certification process may be available for these coexistence things? I see Valerie may be typing an answer, but Valerie, maybe you want to tell us, or maybe Molly, anybody want to just talk to us about this, or should I read Valerie's answer? Because she typed it in. Okay,
Oh,
Valerie.
I'm here. Sorry, juggling too many different things at
Yes.
once. No, just want to note we're just trying to get that buttoned up and through internal review. So hoping to have that rolled out just in the next few weeks. Fingers crossed that that goes smoothly.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Valerie. Thank you so much for your team working on this. It adds, a lot of hope for getting more projects done. Thanks for your work there. And hopefully our participants today will be heartened that we'll have a easier permitting process through this. Okay.
Can I just,
Go ahead, Brock.
I was just thinking maybe Molly or Valerie, if you guys want to put a link into the answers there for your new iBeaver, or your program where you're soliciting folks to contribute your observations to, because I know for a long time that didn't exist, and many of us were using iNaturalist as a way to do that. But your program actually has more data to it. It's a bit more comprehensive and will help us with this kind of work. And so since it's new, supporting that. And I did see a question early on. There was concern about, is iNaturalist being used to, that the use of iNaturalist as it increases, could it potentially exacerbate the harassment or harm of beavers? And I think that's a very interesting question. A lot of us think about a lot. And if that is something you are concerned about in your community, there are ways when you use iNaturalist where you can obscure the specifics of that observation. You can make it less specific if that's something you are specifically concerned about in your community, because that, for instance, there are people who, if they saw that sighting, might target those beavers. So that's something that can be done.
So, yep, hopefully maybe we can drop a link in the chat, or for everyone, with a link to the beaver data collection. Oh, Valerie's got her hand up. Go, Valerie.
Oh, yeah, I just want to tack on to what Brock was mentioning in some of the earlier questions about iNaturalist data and disclosing site-specific information about where beavers can be found. I think it's a sort of a fine line or a double-edged sword between curious people who want to see beavers and, potentially some of the complications or risks that can be associated with that. But I would say we, in the distribution map that we have put together, we display that information at the watershed level, just showing where we have documented presence. We have point level data behind the scenes. We display that at the watershed level for the reasons behind some of those concerns. But I would note that iNaturalist is one of the locations where we mine that data. And then also, if Molly's either dropping it in the chat or I will, we have a beaver observation survey tool that we've put out there where we're also asking the public to submit beaver observation point level data to us, where we can document additional locations where beavers or their confirmed or probable sign has been documented.
Thank you. Well, Valerie, while we've got you on there, I've noticed quite a bit of traffic and in the build up to this webinar as well about relocation parameters and process. And I've been directing people to maybe are you going to make a recording of your webinar from last week, or can you provide anyone any links to learn more about translocation?
Yeah, we love to talk about our translocation activities and our restoration projects, but I've been trying to not let that conversation hijack this webinar. So we've just been pushing people to our beaver restoration webpage, which I've dropped in the link several times. There's a beaver restoration section where people can find information about those projects and prospects. And then there's also a section for meetings and workshops where the webinar that we just hosted, gosh, I'm losing all track of time. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, all
Monday.
blur.
Yep.
Yeah, we're just finalizing making that compliant and the transcripts, and that should be posted within hopefully by the end of the week, depending on how our communications office, how soon they can make that available. So yeah, that will be posted.
All right. Thanks, Valerie. Thanks for your work on that. It seems to be a lot of energy around learning more about that. And let's see, any other panelists want to highlight something that you saw in the Q&A box or current questions you're seeing pop up? Just jump in. Otherwise, I'll ask more of the questions here. We're thinking. Other people are answering, like asking questions here. So I
was going to drop in. There was a question that I saw from, or not a question, but a statement from Heidi Perryman with Martinez Beavers, Alberta Dam, about acknowledging that the folks at Google working with Dr. Emily Fairfax have produced this really fascinating product called Eager. And I put a link in the chat there, and I did want to acknowledge that both Dan and Eddie Corwin and Dan Ackerstein, who worked on that project, are on the webinar. So thanks to those two for your good work with Dr. Fairfax on that really interesting model.
Thanks, Brock. Other panelists chime in on something you've seen, a point you want to make that hasn't been made. I've got otherwise a question lined up. Okay. Well, there have been a few questions about the U.S. Forest Service and collaboration with Beaver Coexistence, restoration. Anybody able to speak to that partnership, which we know occupies so much of California? Anybody have experience with the Forest Service and Beaver coexistence strategies, restoration? Anybody? Holding. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Gray, I can speak to that a tiny bit.
Go for it.
Yeah, I know there's definitely been a lot of partnerships with the Forest Service to do beaver coexistence and especially beaver restoration work on national forest lands and also BLM lands in other states in the West. So since the U.S. Forest Service and the federal government is such a large landowner, they're a great partner for these types of projects because you can make ecosystem scale improvements to the landscape with minimal human infrastructure in place. So they're a great partner if you can get them on board.
Thank you. And Aaron, while we've got you front and center, I know you've thought about this with us in California. Maybe more of our California crew can do this. So Patrick Peterson is making the point, like sometimes beavers move into drainage ditches, right? I mean, they're linear features, and we've got a lot of them in California. Are there options in this situation? Water conveyance ditches. What are we thinking here? Aaron first and maybe others after.
Yeah, water conveyance ditches, canals, human-made infrastructure like that are one of the few places where beaver coexistence is very difficult to do successfully. And it's because those systems are so unnatural. Like beaver usually make their dams in natural pinch points in streams or places that make sense. So they're preferentially choosing where they build their dams. So they're not likely to move their dam if you put a pond leveler in there, for example. But in those linear man-made ditches, a beaver can build a dam anywhere in that ditch and it's equally beneficial to them. So the problem is if you put a pond leveler in one beaver dam in that ditch, the beaver is just as likely to build a new dam upstream or downstream to get the same level of ponding. There are some instances where kind of a extra complicated advanced pond levelers might be effective, but it's really an area where coexistence is not meeting the demand right now.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel want to speak to that? Okay.
I would just I would just support Aaron in saying that, yeah, what really constrained ditches is a big deal. And then there was another question that got answered about burrowing into levees and roads. And that's a whole other activity that beavers um, have presented all of us who have brains bigger than the walnut-sized brain beavers have to get creative and innovative to come up with solutions for the levee road burrowing issues, which are significant and important to address. And yet, we need to come up with ideas for non-lethal coexistence strategies in that arena too.
Thanks a bunch, both Brock and Aaron. We've got a question from Eddie Corwin to Tracy and Damien. So you're on. Were there any downstream flow issues at Doty Ravine based on your work there? Downstream flow situation. Yep, Damien.
No downstream flow issues were ever brought to my attention from downstream landowners. The beaver have started to migrate upstream, and there have been a few concerns about that, but nothing specific brought to my attention on that. But there are some possible diversions within that stream where they could have some impacts.
Tracy?
Yeah, just really, I don't think so. It was something that we talked about, right? It was new to us, and having water right backgrounds and like in growing up in a farm as well, and having that ag background, it's something that we had talked about with Justin Wages at the Land Trust. But I think the difference also downstream of us, it's more rangelands, and it's really spreads out as well as it goes downstream. So we hadn't heard anything from the neighbors. The neighbors knew what was going on, and quite a few of the neighbors in that area do work pretty well with the Land Trust on different projects and parcels and grazing. And so, yeah, I hadn't heard anything. I think it's something to be cognizant about, right? Like when you're building something, like what's going to happen and whose water is downstream. And like I mentioned, like, are they going to have enough water to irrigate or enough water flow to irrigate?
Thank you. Thanks a bunch. Great question, right? Any other panelists want to chime in on any questions they've typed in or things you want to add to the conversation? We have just a little more time, and I'll ask the people on the call, like in our webinar, if you have questions, now's your last moment to enter questions into the Q&A box and tap this wealth of expertise you've got here. Of course, you have your camera ready for the QR codes I'm going to show you very shortly, and so you can access the additional resources and be in touch with so many different angles here, right? Think about these coexistence strategies and whether you can talk to your neighbors about them after this webinar. Okay, Zachary Wells is, how can SGMA impact this program? So anybody have an idea about what that acronym is and how it impacts this program, the coexistence program? Or Zachary Wells, you could spell out your acronym and the next time you type it, but maybe somebody knows. SGS, Kate.
It's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and I'm going to throw Brock under the bus to talk about if he has any thoughts about how this could impact that.
Right, and this relates to a thread I was following in the Q&A where they were Ann McMillan was talking about, well, how did that Doty Ravine project affect groundwater? Can you show additional groundwater recharge because of beaver activity and all that work? And Ann was finding sites for monitoring groundwater, and maybe somebody can see it. But Brock, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that, as beavers are engaging in the fluvial system of the riparian wetland system and increasing the impoundment of water, the retention of water longer, the increase in the wetted width of water, I think at least at the shallow groundwater level or the hyporheic level, when we have surface water in a stream, that's basically the visual expression of saturated groundwater. So to have surface water expressing itself, we need to have saturated subsurface water. And I think as what Tracy and Damien spoke about at Doty, there's the surface that you see on above, but the subsurface irrigation, the lateral extension of the impact of beaver dams, has been seen in a number of studies to be increased. And there are some adjacent groundwater wells, piezometer type studies in other places that have shown this. And so I think clearly if there was funding for monitoring and that kind of work in these areas where beaver dam analogs and or beavers are being worked with, that increasing monitoring, adjacent piezometers, groundwater monitoring, either by hand or using computer-based, pressure transducers and stuff, is going to be increasingly really important. There was some studies of this in Child Meadows up by Mount Lassen that UC Davis did, funded by CDFW, that did show an increase in that water. Groundwater recharge relative to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is an it depends question based on the conditions of those systems. The more sand gravel dominated watersheds of Southern California behave really different than inland waterways that are more clay dominated, that have aquitards, that may not connect surface water to groundwater very quickly. And so I think each Sigma basin, each groundwater sustainability agency that has a groundwater sustainability plan in each of your Sigma basins has got to characterize that. I know that folks are very interested in the Sonoma watershed as a Sigma basin in Sonoma County, about the relationship of the beavers in Sonoma Creek. Also, there's a question about Kenwood here on there. And there's beavers in Glen Ellen, they're in Kenwood, they're in Main Stem Sonoma Creek, they're all the way down to the Baylands. And is there a benefit to the slowing, spreading, and sinking of water due to beaver dams that can act as shock absorbers to hold water later longer on the land? So instead of it flash running off too quickly because of the related upland impervious surfaces from development or not, which is also a Stormwater Clean Water Act nexus with groundwater recharge, because surface water and groundwater are a single resource. They're not separated. And so I think there's just a whole lot more to understand here. But generally what people observe is that beavers don't make water, but boy, do they keep it around. And when folks want to dehydrate a floodplain to do something on it, the first thing you do is kill the beaver so you can ditch the system to dewater the adjacent areas. So I think the presence of beavers contributing more water on the landscape is a well-worn, well-known reality, which is why the de-beaverers to dehydrate areas to get at those beautiful carbon-rich wetland soils wanted to get rid of beavers instead of having the beaver wetlands.
Thanks, Brock. Thanks a lot. Well, we're at our last 5 minutes, and I want to give you a brief presentation of additional resources. So, however you catch QR codes, be ready. And I'll give a bit of thanks then, and we'll wrap up in about 5 minutes. So here, let me share my screen. Yep. So here goes. So if you've got questions, if you need to ask for help, we've got an online forum for all of California. We've got these Beaver Institute brains and experience and our own team and others all ready to answer your questions and calls for assistance. Just hit that contact us button. This QR code will lead you right to our forum. Operators are standing by. Please fill out the form. Please pass the form on to your friends. This forum is about coexistence, however, and we're really targeting landowners. So please don't fill out the form if you want someone else to do something that is not willing. Please ask the person that actually has the problem to fill out the form. That's what we're looking for at this site here. Please encourage landowners, land managers to ask for our help, because we're standing by to help with coexistence. If you're wanting more information about some of the solutions you heard today, you'll want to hit this QR code because we've got a bunch of information at Occidental Arts and Ecology Center's Water Institute website. We also link to the Beaver Institute here. For these types of problems, we've got solutions. So hit this QR code, and there's more there than that. But this is our coexistence sort of overview website here, there. Okay? If you're looking again to take this professional training with the scholarship for California people, hit this QR code and you will get to this web page with the application. You'll want to choose the Beaver Professional platform for becoming a professional. There's also another training platform for people who don't intend to be professionals. You could do that too if you're interested in lots of beaver stuff. We're providing scholarships for those professionals that are headed that way anywhere in California. So that's the Beaver Institute. Thank you, Aaron Cooper, for highlighting this potential opportunity. Now, Valerie and Molly earlier said go to their website with the Beaver Restoration Program. There's so much information there, notifications of upcoming meetings and webinars, and soon to be a recording of that one from a week ago, Monday, that talks about translocation. There is a link if you want actually ready to submit or think about submitting a proposal for translocation. There's that form there. There's so much great information on the department's website. There's the QR code for beavers. Now, another arm of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is called Human-Wildlife Conflicts, and they have a toolkit. And their toolkit now, very recently, I believe, is specifically addresses beaver. And so there's a lot of great information about range and life history and species information. And also, if you've really got trouble with a conflict, that's where you submit your form and ask for their help. So that QR code is there for people who are experiencing human wildlife conflicts and want to get the department's perspective right away. That's the bat phone for the department. I want to thank so many people for being here today, presenting, preparing. This is the moment we've all been working towards. You did a great job. Love the support. Love the collaboration that Cal Fish and Wildlife and Beaver Institute and all of us have been nurturing for so long to make this all happen. So thank you, presenters, for being here. Thanks, Andros, for providing support. And thanks for the many people who are behind the presenters to make this possible, your agencies, your family, your friends, your support network. And again, want to thank the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's granting program, Nature-Based Solutions, Mountain Meadows Grant Program, for supplying the funding for our Beaver Coexistence program. And also, all of the people, we had 300 people register for today's webinar. There's a lot of interest. Thank you all who were here live today for sitting through it. Really appreciate your attention. You're helping to build this movement to better understand how beavers and humans can live together in peace and harmony and help California's fire, water, habitat, and so many other solutions forward in partnership with that non-human animal we call the beaver. Thank you all. Please look for an email later on to get that link for this webinar recording and share it with your friends. We're going to stop the recording now